it's a fair mix of, from the client side, from the agency side, and the guys who are at the forefront of it all, from players like Adobe. So I'm not going to steal any thunder. The way we'll structure it is, we'll keep the last 5 minutes for Q&A, for all the questions that we have. But obviously, we'd like to start with you guys doing a quick introduction about yourselves and the organizations that you represent. And what will also be good is if you could just, tell us your opening remarks on this topic that we're discussing today. Yeah?
Great, thanks. Great. So, when I got the topic on which we were supposed to speak, I was like, wow, for Adobe, there could be nothing better than this. How many of you all are creative people in the room? Yeah?
Everyone's creative.
And how many of you all are data people in the room? Okay, great. So you'll both know Adobe. The creative guys, obviously, for the InDesign, Photoshop, etc., etc. And the data guys for erstwhile Omniture, now Site Catalyst, etc. So I represent Adobe. I'm Bansiri. I take care of industry strategy. And obviously, I do not think data diminishes creativity in any way. The reason why Adobe has a play in both these places is because we do believe that data is the science part of the story, but when you're doing the art part of the story, which is the creativity part, you do need the data to inform you, and that's my opening remark on this panel.
Great. Coming from a bank, where normally we all believe that the bankers are more the left brain people and always are used to of data and numbers all the time. I believe it's extremely difficult to be creative when you are in banking. And that's what we are trying to do at Kotak Mahindra Bank, where I head digital initiatives for the bank. And I believe it's always a combination of a left and a right brain, because data can validate and guide you through, but the process of imagination and creativity is something which neither it can work in isolation with data, nor it can be led with data. So I think one has to find a right balance and a path.
Hi, everyone. When we have these brainstorming sessions in an advertising agency, you've got people from all departments. There are people who are throwing research, data. There are creative people who are wanting to create some magic. And there are planning people who have some valuable insights based out of a underlying human truth. The insight could be from a consumer's life, it could be from a market, media, it could be from a usage perspective. This is one question which kind of goes around each time when we have these brainstorming meetings, because when you have huge amount of research, that research leading to an insight, and that insight leading to a creative proposition from where that the art of storytelling, which is the creative part, starts happening. They sort of coexist. I don't think that's really a question that needs a very specific answer. They coexist. They probably are part of the two sides of the same coin. It's just that we perhaps need to see that this data doesn't overwhelm us. Perhaps the creative community may need to start to learn with a little bit change in the way data is supposed to be used as you create user experiences, as you create, say, an information architecture, create campaigns which are more real-time. So I would say this is, two sides of the same coin. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Yatish Srivastav, and I represent an industry which is life insurance as head of marketing and operations for Aegon Religare Life. Life insurance industry has not distinguished itself either in the ability to use data or to exhibit a lot of creativity. But having said that, on a more serious basis, I actually don't really see the dichotomy in this question. Data is something that is all around us. We have to learn to use it. We have to learn to mine it for the right insights. And then we have to take a strategic and creative leap from there, from the insight, into something that actually translates into action and execution. So I really see this more as a continuum than anything else. What's really changing in this world today, I think when I used to work way back in advertising many, many years ago, data used to come in a linear fashion. You had the ability to analyze it. You had the time and the luxury of time to analyze it. Today, the velocity of that data has amplified itself n times from what it used to be. And I think that's where it actually looks at where we tend to put basically people into stereotypes. So you have the very nerdy looking data scientists on one side of the spectrum, and on the other side you have the pigtailed creative entity, so to speak. However, I think this is really the classical stereotype issue. It's a big continuum, and I don't think that one can exist without the other, really. Because if you just keep churning data and you don't get anything actionable out of it, it's useless. And if you're not using data in today's world to actually take to the creative springboard, that's also pretty useless.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So that brings me to the next question, Rajiv. Starting with you, and please, anyone can jump in after that. You deal with both sets of people almost on a daily basis, right? And we all know how easy or difficult it is to deal with either, right? So what's your experience been? Do you think this is a phenomena that varies by the type of industry you're in? So for example, a fashion brand might not be as impacted by this, or need not be as impacted as this as, let's say, a BFSI or a insurance client, right? So your views, does it vary by industry?
Yeah, so we handle various kinds of clients from various sectors. I don't think, I've not seen many advertising briefs across advertising agencies, but I'm sure about one thing. Most creative briefs will have a question which will be, what's the consumer insight? What's the key insight? And that key insight has come from huge amount of research that has happened. It could be any industry. That consumer insight now has a lot of other companions. A usage insight, for instance, a future insight, media insight, product insight, purchase insight. Purchase insight, people talk about showrooming as a concept where people inside a showroom make that impulse decision at that very moment. Now, when you have so many kinds of insights to tackle, we need to figure out, and that's the experience that our people have acquired over a period of time, what kind of questions to ask. Data can be overwhelming, we talked about. YouTube is going to celebrate their 10th birthday in May. I think last time they announced 100 hours of video content being uploaded in 1 minute. That's more than 12 days. 12 days of content being uploaded in a minute. You have huge amount of stuff to mine. From that, then you figure out what's actionable insight. Yatish talked about. That actionable insight, that needs to get converted into something that you create. It's not about promotion, it's about persuasion. That's advertising. So we need to see what are the right questions to ask, then what to make out of those insights, and then you use them before the campaign. So that's before the campaign. While the campaign goes on, the campaign could be a huge campaign that you've created. The campaign could be an interface that you create. That interface could be an app or a website or whatever screen that you're using. That screen has users interacting with the screen. That comes from analytics. Those analytics then need to be converted into something that you action, and information architects work on it to enhance the user experience of that interface. So different kinds of experiences need different kinds of insights. Those insights have to be curated in a manner that it doesn't get too overwhelming, and that applies for all industries. You just need to ask the right questions.
Sure. Moving to Bansali.
So that's a very interesting point. I think what's really changed is there's this concept that we talk about a lot called democratization of data. What does that essentially mean? That if I am somebody who's a creative person and I am designing a user experience, what I need to see is the insight. Whereas if I'm a data analyst and I'm trying to build hypothesis, what I want to see is the whole fire hose of data which is available for me to use, right? So essentially, exactly what you said, when you're asking the right questions, am I able to make that data usable for the role in the shape and fashion in which they need it? Then it does not diminish creativity. In fact, it enhances it significantly, because finding that insight is kind of like trying to find a needle in a haystack. it's a difficult job. And I think it's a specialist job, and therefore we have new skills around data scientists and around analysts who now inform a lot of hypotheses that the creative guys need to work with. And in fact, I think the creative's job has gone up multifold, because earlier he was creating one experience. Now with these insights, he's possibly creating 10 experiences and learning very fast whether they work or not. And if they don't work, by the way, you have more work because you need to create more experiences. So yeah.
Yep. So Deepak, your organization has been quite innovative of late. We've been seeing a lot of campaigns that are coming out of your organization, which are, challenging norms, doing things new way. And my guess is that data has a critical role to play in it, right? Now, we would like to hear your views on how do you guys cope up with this, right? And what is the level of commitment that you have towards defining your creative at the back of data?
So I would say that it's, as I said initially, it's a combination of both. Data helps, data guides, but I strongly believe that data is not the sole guiding point when you build or create solutions. So for example, if you look at the first banking product, which was digital and social, that was created by Kotak, and we were told it's the most innovative product anywhere in the world on digital, called Jiffy. Now, when we created a product like this, frankly, we didn't go with a lot of data because a lot of data is just not available. So if you know today that, yes, there is a data about that there are customers who are going and shopping online, or probably they use a banking service online. But when you start imagining this, probably for creating completely a digital product, is that data relevant in this context? Answer is no. So I think one has to start thinking of what are the other data points which may not be directly relevant for the decision that you are taking, but that it gives you a certain direction, probably certain amount of intuition, and a lot more of a trend which you imagine how things would look if this is the way it continues in an industry which is not directly relevant to you probably today. Similarly, we realized that, for example, when we launched #banking, and I'm sure a lot of you would have seen that campaign which is going live, we were the first bank globally to integrate Twitter with banking. Now, I'm sure banks world over could have also done this. It's not that a bank in India got this great idea to say that, why not? And if I would have just looked at the data, and I would have looked at probably the Twitter adoption in India, probably the Twitter adoption to Facebook is 1:10. So I could have said, fine, let me do more on Facebook. Why am I going and wasting my time on Twitter? Because customers are on Facebook. But then we started looking at the trends, which is more about saying it doesn't matter what data shows, because if there are people who are looking at something which is short, crisp, and precise information, which is the nature of Twitter, integrating it probably can be a great experience. Once we launched, we found that more than 25% of Facebook customers connected Twitter. So while Twitter to Facebook ratio in India is 1:10, for us it's 1:4. So I think a lot of times, if you just hold yourself for the want of data, you may just not get started.
Yeah, that's a valid point. So Yatish, do you want to share any case studies from your organization or your experience?
No, so I just want to take up from what Deepak said. And I think that, a lot of people have actually started hiding behind data to stop taking decisions, right? So the ability to have data or not have data also drives my ability to take a decision or not, which I think is incorrect, right? Because in which case, Kotak would have never launched Twitter banking if they kept waiting for data. However, having said that, I think that when we launched life insurance online, we were the first company, we were a 2-year-old company at that point in time, we launched life insurance online. There was no data point that would have validated whether we would have been successful or not successful, right? Today, we spend, we get almost 1/3 of our policies in the online space, right? Direct buying off the internet, which was inconceivable five to 6 years back. However, there was no data that told me I could do it. But once I've started getting this momentum, then I've started using a lot of data analysis to understand what clicks with my customers, what doesn't click, to look at placements, to look at various other things that I do on the website, that I do in terms of communication, that I do in terms of sheer navigation and the user experience, that is being driven a lot by data, which is improving my conversion metrics, for example, right? So if one looks at this, I don't think that the objective of data is to paralyze you, because the minute you get into that and you get swamped by the data, then you're not going to be able to take the next business decision, right? And the second thing that I want to make a point about is that very often we, in this business, link creativity with communication, right? Creativity can be about a sales process. Creativity can be about a business model. Creativity can be about your HR practice and the organization that you need to build around, right? So if I take some of the business models today, they would have not got supported by any data, right? Uber runs the largest taxi service in the world, doesn't own a single car, right? Airbnb has no real estate inventory. Now, these are all very creative business models. So why are we limiting the conversation to creativity, to just communication? I think that's doing creativity itself a disservice, because you require a lot of creativity to change business models. You require a lot of creativity to enhance user experiences, for example. You need a lot of creativity to change your sales processes. So all of that needs to get taken into account. And I don't think that there's any way that we can, shy away from the fact that data is going to play a part either before or after, right? And sometimes in real time. So I think one of the big advantages of data today is that it's allowing us to test small ripples. In the old days, if you had to do something, you had to go and throw a big rock and hope that your wave got somewhere, right? That was the classical way. I think the new data and the new digital environment and ecosystem is allowing us to test little ripples and figure out which one goes the furthest, and then put your money behind that and make a big splash. So I think that's a very different way of looking at things as well, right? Where you're not throwing big rocks into the water, you're throwing small pebbles, and then you're figuring out what works for you before you push the might of the organization behind it. So in today's day, you have to align your resources where you're getting the maximum return. And I think data is going to allow you to do that more and more as you go along.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point you make, that it's about creative business models are evolving out of the use of data. And Bansuri, coming to, building on that point, Adobe as an organization obviously is working with a lot of new age companies, so to say, right? So could you share some learnings from there in terms of how are they managing this explosion of data and using it for processes other than just communication? Is that happening?
Sure, yeah. In fact, that's something that we are seeing more and more. So creativity is no longer about a poster or a banner that one can improve. Of course, you can do all of that, and that's really important. We've had very interesting examples of retail companies looking at data around cart abandonment or around out-of-stock inventory to plan their inventory planning processes, something totally unrelated. Or we've seen a very interesting example of telcos looking at online leads and deciding where to roll out their broadband networks faster, because people who are online are relatively higher, our average revenue per user, and therefore they look at that data and say, okay, here's where I'm going to get more profitable customers. So those are creative business planning ideas. We've seen a lot of we've seen a lot of good work being done around planning campaigns, communication ideas, A/B testing, multivariate testing. And I think that if I were to give just a communication line and task the creative person in my company to come up with 10 ideas, that stretches his creative caliber far more than one idea. So the way we look at it is data is kind of like the voice of your customer, and how you respond is what the creative person's task today is. And you're moving away from one-way traffic to a conversational interaction. And I think that's far more challenging and fulfilling for the creative person, because now armed with that data, he can go and say, you know what, I came up with that idea, and guess what, it works, which was earlier so difficult and so post-facto, right?
So, Rajiv, wanted to ask you this question, that while the debate is still on whether it is enhancing or diminishing creativity, does it also put pressure on agencies like y'all to look out for new kind of talent? Because typically, we've been very comfortable with using data prior to the campaign, for planning the insight and then the springboard. We've also been very comfortable post the campaign, because we do post-campaign evals. What has changed is pretty much the real-time aspect of data, where you're using real-time data to, kind of change or course correct whenever there is a need, right? So does that put also pressure on agencies like us to look out for new kind of talent? Is that happening?
We already are looking at, people like creative technologists, data analysts, coming in an ecosystem of digital marketers in any case. But I think the key is for our existing people who are analyzing huge amount of data in any case. So there's a research agency, you've got a focus group, you're doing some sort of a dipstick, and there's some data that is being thrown. So you probably have a demographic, there's a bullseye, you say this is my target group, this is my key audience that I want to target. But when the research comes in, the existing people are learning new tricks. How to mine the data. How to bring analytics upfront and make it a part of the planning department. So post your analysis of a particular user experiencing an interface, how can that be brought into the planners, how can that be fed into the planners thinking process? So what we are trying to do is train the existing people in a way they can analyze the data. If you can share 2 taglines to a client and say, this worked and this didn't work in a real environment, you can sell the creative easily. The clients are going to buy that particular creative because it's backed by data. So our existing people, including the creative, including planning, including account management and the entire digital team, they are learning new ways to talk that language. And that language is probably largely derived because we are moving from campaigns to marketing solutions. It's about a marketing solution. So your thinking process in the very beginning is starting differently. So if you have a creative brief that probably looked like 4 questions or 6 questions at the beginning, it's getting changed to a business springboard. What is changing in the consumer's life? How are they consuming the product now as opposed to maybe 5 years? Do you want them to make friends? Do you want this communication to make them as friends? Do you want them to evangelize? Do you want them to be advocates? Are you only talking about your brief to be creating advocacy? So you've got great points on your awareness levels, consideration levels, or whatever. You only want them to behave like brand ambassadors. If that's the brief, then our creative people and planning people are tackling it very differently. So yes, new resources are being looked at, definitely, specialists, but the existing people are getting trained for these new tricks and new tactics to understand this process better.
And Deepak, how do you handle that at the client side?
So, well, as I said, I'm not rubbishing data. Data is, as I said, in bank is very, very important. And one of the areas, and I'm sure all of you know, data scientist as a profession is rated among the top 5 professions that will be in demand over next 1 decade. So those who are preparing their kids or those who are going to learn and decide which career to choose, data science is right up on top. Because increasingly, while in Indian context, data is not yet mature and a lot of banks are embarking or they have embarked on this journey only over the last few years. At Kotak, we use advanced analytic engine called Unica, which helps us build the entire campaign in the real time. So if I know that a customer has booked a flight ticket to, say, a far-off destination, it gives us capability to offer him or her a travel insurance or a forex card at the same time, because we know what transaction happened and thereby what is the next purchase that customer is likely to make. So I think it creates a lot of unique opportunity, and that also demands the kind of skill sets that banks never looked at in the past. So we are increasingly looking at this talent, and which I would say is very scarce today. You don't find a lot of good people on the analytics side. And same on the creativity side, because while creative people can think that they can work in isolation, the reality is that you always need to backtest and validate a lot of your assumptions, because once we launch a product, maybe you don't have a data when you launch a product. For example, we launched another innovative product called KPay, which was the first product of its kind which does a real-time bank transfer on Facebook, over 225 million customers in India. And when we launched, we had no data to ascertain that why would a customer of a bank A or a bank B would use a social platform to send money across any bank, because we were creating a bank agnostic product. Once we started with the product and we went with the launch of the product, we started seeing increasingly the public sector bank customers were the first one to adopt. Because obviously they found the payment very cumbersome in their existing banking platform, or a lot of them were not using banking app. So then data started helping us to say, okay, we have got a product, we know who are the users, now how do we change that adoption? But as I said, I mentioned the first part earlier, that could we have waited for the data? Answer is no. Now once we have launched, there is enough data for you to decide and change and correct your course quickly to say how do we build it up for scale. And this needs, as I said, combination of people with left and right brain to work together. One cannot do it all. And I think that's where banking and at Kotak we are moving.
Thank you. So we have just about 2 minutes left. So is there any questions from the audience? No? Okay, if that's the case, then my last question, and would love to have your closing remarks on this, that while it may or may not enhance or diminish creativity, but don't you think that data to a large extent is templatizing creativity? Everything on the web is beginning to look the same, right? The same kind of banners, the same kind of ads, and there is too much of a Me Too phenomena happening because people are looking at the same data and doing the same things. So, yeah, please.
So, Vineet, I can't disagree with you because that is typically what seems to be happening, because what works on one website and gets kind of publicized, then other people want to do the same thing. So, but I think there's a problem of nascency more than anything else, because I think people will find more and more creative ways. So I don't think we'll get templatized. What we are seeing right now is a temporary kind of nascency phenomena, because it's just catching on in terms of what you want to do. But for example, just to put it in context, there can be many creative ways of looking at data also. So typically when you have a Facebook page and a fan following on Facebook, you tend to analyze how your customers are engaging with themselves. We had done an exercise which was called what their friends are doing. So we went beyond and expanded to look at what are not just our fans, but their friends and their community talking about, and figured out whether there's any conversations that we can get into. So yes, some degree of templatization is bound to occur because it's a fairly nascent and recent science. But I think over time, human creativity will always show differentiation as we go along. So I think it's largely temporary at the moment.
I don't tend to agree completely. The fact that if your creative process comes from a brand proposition, the business objective, and goes down the path of the right creative process, then you've got a different creative output. Now that creative output is unfortunately appearing in a place which is cluttered already, so it might look temporalized, but otherwise it's a separate thought process altogether, and it's emanating from the core brand proposition. So it's unique that way.
I think, as I said earlier, both the processes have to synergize to create what organization and brands mean for the consumer. And imagination along with data has to do this work together.
So I think that if data is leading to a Me Too phenomena, it's because it's data and it's not insight. And I think it's insight what should drive your creative thinking and not data. The moment you move from data to insight, it will never be a Me Too, because your insight will always be unique to your brand, to your business, and to your customers. And that's what we should strive to achieve as opposed to just looking at data.
I think that's a wonderful wrap-up comment. So it's not about data impacting creativity in a positive or negative way. It's about how you use data and to what extent you use data. And with that, I would like to thank the panel. Thank you very much. Could we please have a big round of applause for them? And they'll be around for those who want to ask the questions after the session. Yeah? Thank you.